think I need to just break up with my phone, essentially. That's what we're saying here. I have literally filmed this intro 10 times. It's not getting any better. Hi guys, it's Leanne, and if you are anything like me right now, then you have about 47 different forms of media around you, which is just shoving the news physically into your eyeballs. So before we go any further, I beg of you, put down your phone, close all of the browser tabs, even Twitter, especially Twitter, and turn off your TV. Give yourself this 20 minutes, because that is the average length of my rambling. I'm just saying, I have self-awareness. And just stop. I, like many other people out there, am immunocompromised. This is not an unusual thing in this world that we live in, despite the fact that our world leaders would like us to think otherwise. Yeah, I see you not seeing us. I see that. And I have done nothing this week except for exist in a quiet state of panic. Well, I mean, that's a lie, because it hasn't always been a quiet state. There has definitely been some ugly crying. My normal response to really bad situations is to not read, because my brain is so busy that when I'm reading and everything else is quiet, my brain just goes completely haywire. But this situation is somewhat unique, because everywhere outside of books right now is horrible. And so I have decided that I am going to fall back on the one life skill that I really have, which is recommending books to you guys to make both of us feel better. Okay. The first books that I have to recommend fall into the category of my number one coping method other than outright panic, which is to replace one huge emotion, in this case the anxiety because of everything, with another big emotion. Because here's a fun fact, just like when you have a broken rib and it really freaking hurts, and then you get a paper cut, and then the paper cut is the only thing that you can feel because damn it, that hurts a hell of a lot worse. That is exactly how your brain works. So in this case, I suggest losing yourself with books that are going to make you feel big emotions. The first book that I am going to recommend is Unsticky by Sarah Manning. This is essentially the modern day, well, I say modern day, I mean, you know, early 2000s version of Pretty Woman. Grace is apparently living the dream. She's living the dream that she was told as a woman that she should want. She's wearing the expensive clothes, she's living in a London apartment, and she's working for a fashion editorial newspaper, and she loves it. She just loves it, except that she can't afford the clothes. She is living in a damp infested apartment, and she hates her job, which is literally going nowhere because she has never progressed beyond, oh, you know, sorting out the teas. And one day, whilst having an absolute meltdown, and can't we all relate right now, Grace literally bumps into Vaughn. Vaughn is essentially Mr. Darcy for our times. He is prickly, he is snide, he has a wall up which is like the height of the Great Wall of China if you built it that way. And Vaughn is sick of dating. He is sick of pretending to like the women in his very high class life. And so he decides to offer Grace, who is a messy mess at this time, a compromise which could work for both of them. This book gave me a roller coaster of feels. It does help that I also read it out loud to lovely wife Helen, which I talked about in this video up here. It is a 500 plus page book, and it kept us absolutely hooked for hours and hours and hours, and we laughed so hard that we had to stop because my face physically hurt. But also there was big sobby tears too. It has everything. The book has everything. Just this one. The next book that I have to recommend, also a wonderful audiobook for the record, is 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. This one is a memoir, and it is tiny, it's so short, it's the opposite of Unsticky. It's like under, I don't know, 160 pages. It's 97 pages, it's 97 pages of pure joy and wholesomeness. Essentially, this is the story of Helene Hanff, who was a writer and a journalist living in New York in the 40s, and her pure and wholesome and wonderful correspondence with an antiquated bookseller in London. Helene was an obsessive bibliophile who liked the feel of books. She was of the opinion that Americans did not publish books properly, that they just didn't pay enough attention to them as actual objects, and for that I will forever love her. And so she tracked down the address for Marks & Co bookshop in London. When her letter arrived there, it just happened to be passed to Frank Dole. He was a bookseller who at the time worked with rare books. He would buy up entire estates as they were sold off and find these amazingly antique books. And this chance correspondence sparked a friendship which lasted for years. This tiny book, which was first published in the 70s, is all of their letters to each other, and then eventually it is Helene's visit to London. At several points in this tiny little book, I had to pause the audio and go do something else because it was making my eyes look like I was chopping onions, and you do not want to see me when I am chopping onions. It's a bad scene, man. It's a bad scene. My next go-to coping strategy is to just pretend that I don't live here. Is to pretend that this world doesn't exist and to take myself off to some other land which exists somewhere else, which, even though it's probably war-torn, is better than this one. My first recommendation for this is book 1 in the Belgariad series, Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings. This is the fantasy series that first got me into fantasy, and yes, part of my heart will always live in this world. This is the story of Garion, who is a lowly scullery kitchen boy, because of course he is, and he lives on a farm in the middle of nowhere with his Aunt Paul, who is an absolute tyrant and runs the kitchens. And then one day an old storyteller just happens to show up and tells Garion a story about gods and monsters, wherein one king, the Revan King, is there to unite the world again. And Garion thinks this is a whole load of ponypox. Points in the comments if you can tell me which character in MASH said that. Done Dad's Army, and now I've done MASH references. You guys know where my true allegiances lie. Garion thinks old stories are just old stories until in the middle of the night the old storyteller comes back and essentially kidnaps Garion. He tells him that they have to run, and unfortunately Aunt Paul is running along behind them. This series also includes two of my favourite characters in the entire world, Silk and Barak. Silk is essentially a lowly street thief, except he's kind of not, and Barak is essentially a Viking warrior. Okay, he is a Viking warrior, and their love-hate bromance is just, it's goals, guys, it's goals. My second recommendation for just ripping yourself away from this world is to go into a fantasy world which is at once fantasy and also, you know, genteel. This is A Natural History of Dragons, which is the first book in the Lady Trent Memoirs series by Marie Brennan, and oh boy, when I'm asked to describe this series, I often say that it's like David Attenborough meets dragons meets Jane Austen, because essentially that's where we are. We are first introduced to Lady Trent as a little girl Isabella who's running about in the woods at the back of her father's vast estate, very much not being a lady, and collecting sparkling corpses, which are essentially mini tiny dragons. Except in Scotland, which is essentially Austen's England, young ladies do not dissect dragons. They do not get into natural history at all. But Isabella is absolutely determined that she is going to be a natural historian. These books are so much fun because at the start of each of them we get the voice of the mature Lady Trent, who now has grandchildren and many years on is an absolute warrior in her field. But it didn't exactly come easy. There is so much representation in these books because they essentially mirror Austen's England. We get all of the prejudices that they had at the time, but from Isabella's point of view, who is a very broad-minded person. This series, I guarantee you, will take you completely away from the room that you are currently self-isolating in. Although if you're like me and you're an introvert, you've been doing that anyway because that is our natural state of being. Next up, I offer you alternative coping strategy number 3, and that's ugly cry for a different reason. Crying is good for you. Crying is your body's way of telling you that it needs to release all of the pent-up anxiety inside of you. But I personally think that it's sometimes useful to ugly cry about things that are an alternative to our current situation. And so the first book that I offer you is What Alice Forgot by Liane Moriarty. Most of you are probably thinking, but why would you ugly cry over a Liane Moriarty book? All of Liane Moriarty's books are mysteries. And that's true, this is a mystery, but more than any other of Liane Moriarty's books, this one is a mystery with a heart in it. This story is about Alice, who one day falls in the gym because, like many of the rest of us, she is freaking clumsy, and she really badly hits her head. When she wakes up, she gets up and she looks in the mirror and she is horrified by what she sees there, because what she sees there is not the head wound that she's managed to acquire, it's the fact that she is 20 years older than she thought she was, and she's not actually pregnant with her first child. What Alice then pieces together over the next couple of weeks is that her life looks nothing like the life that she thinks that she just left. Whether this is genuinely amnesia because she hit her head, or whether this is her brain's way of coping with this massive trauma, she doesn't know, and neither does her psychologist or her doctor. And so Alice has no choice but to try and navigate this life, which is 20 years ahead of where she thought she left it, with, you know, a husband and her sister talking to her and her first baby on the way, and this house that she's happily doing up in her dungarees and her paintbrush, and somehow adjust to this new life wherein she has 2 teenage children who don't really talk to her very much, a husband who, she definitely does not talk to, a sister who she does not talk to, and a body which is completely different from the one that she left, because this one goes to the gym 3 times a week and has a personal trainer. I traditionally absolutely hate amnesia storylines because I'm just like, I don't care. I literally don't care. But that is because most amnesia storylines happen in thrillers wherein, you know, a murder has happened and we can't remember it. But this is not that. This is not that book at all. And I guarantee you, when the twists happen, because it's Liane Moriarty, so it might not be murder, but there's definitely plot twists, you are gonna ugly cry. And the next book that I have, which, I might never actually read again because it made me ugly cry so hard, but has a permanent place of deep love in my heart. And the movie is also amazing, but I literally can only watch it every 5 years because it destroys me. And that is Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe by Fanny Flagg. This is a book which is set in the 80s at a nursing home. Evelyn, who is a housewife who is constantly criticised and just eats her feelings because relatable. Anybody else stocked up on junk food, or is it just me right now? Is visiting her mother-in-law. She's fairly sure that her husband loves more than he loves her. And she's visiting her in a nursing home because her mother-in-law is not only evil, but she is also now slightly senile. Can't relate. Evelyn is clearly not enjoying this visit, so she goes out to the waiting room to make her chocolate bar last for as long as she can possibly make it last, and she is interrupted by the whirlwind who is Mrs. Threadgood. But somehow Evelyn cannot help but be absolutely dragged in by the fairy story that Izzy Threadgood weaves about the 1930s cafe that she ran with her friends, which served the best of fried green tomatoes that drew everybody for miles. This is such a complicated book. It has LGBTQIA+++ representation out of the wazoo. It has race relations in the 1930s. It has discussions of poverty and alcoholism, but it has found families, and it has hope, and it has at its heart a lesbian relationship which just exists despite all odds. My next coping strategy, always, I think, is to give my brain something else that it can completely obsess over. And yes, you know that means that I'm talking thrillers and mysteries. First off, we'll just run really quickly past this one because I think I've recommended it so much now that I actually need commission. I need chocolate or something. every time somebody buys this book, the publishers should send me a box of chocolates, because I literally have not stopped talking about it since it came out, and that is The Lost Man by Jane Harper. The reason I'm not going to talk too much about this one is because I have a whole review on it up here, which you can also distract your brain with right now. But next up, another thriller that I just really don't think that anybody talks about enough is Apple Tree Yard by Louise Doughty. This is the story of Yvonne Carmichael, who at the beginning of this novel is sitting in the witness box because she has been charged with murder, and she is getting a hell of a grilling by the prosecution. And then we flip to months and months before this trial, when she was a successful scientist. She was married for a really long time. She has grown up children, a beautiful house, friends, and a completely different life that looks nothing like this one. And we follow this narrative in the present, in the courtroom. There is a lot of courtroom drama in this one. If you like courtroom drama, you're gonna love this one. And then in the past, where she makes what she thinks of now is the biggest mistake in her life. And the whole time, the one thing that Yvonne is telling us over and over and over again is that she's innocent. This is one of the books that when I finished it, I wanted to immediately just open it again at the front page and start reading it again, because now that I know that's changed everything, and I want to see all those scenes now that I have this knowledge. And here's a great thing. There is also a mini series of this which you can watch when you're finished, starring one of my favourite actresses in the entire world. You're welcome. And the final one that I'm going to recommend is a bit of an evil one, because it's the first one in a series, and I guarantee you if you read it and it hooks you, you're going to love every single book after it. This is The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler, which is the first book in the Philip Marlowe series, which is of course the original gritty noir LA private detective novel written in 1939. This follows Philip Marlowe, who is a cynical, definitely almost always drunk PI who's slightly down on his luck. He just about manages to keep his grubby little offices open and himself in quite smart suits, but he has managed to piss off everybody, especially the police department, and so it's making doing his job incredibly difficult, and he doesn't know how much longer he's going to be able to stay afloat. And then he gets a very random job from an extremely wealthy old money family, the Sternwoods, who are being blackmailed. I was so skeptical about these books when I first went into them, because I was expecting the kind of brand of women as sexy, brainless objects and men as rough, tough, drinking, smoking, you know, just everything I don't like about detective fiction, but where it originally started. And they're nothing like that. Marlowe is smart, and he's a wisecracker, and he is a tough talker, maybe a little bit too tough because he can't always back it up, and he's incredibly damaged. But because of that, he sees the worth in everybody. Women in these novels are not treated like objects. He treats them as people who have scarily smart brains that outwit him frequently and that he doesn't entirely understand. He is weirdly feminist for a novel that came out in the 1930s, and he's weirdly progressive in his thoughts about race and a whole lot of other things. And Raymond Chandler has a weird ability to ramp the stakes up in each different novel, so even though I know that there are like 7 in the series and that there's another one to come, I'm frequently thinking, oh, he gonna die. This is it. He has got himself into a situation he will never talk himself out of, and I have never been disappointed yet. And that's it. Those are all of the coping mechanisms which I am currently employing to try to just not panic. I really hope that if nothing else, this video has given you 20 minutes of a complete brain break to just sit and smile and obsess about books, because God knows we all need a brain break from this. If you've read any of the books on this list, or you would like to suggest your own books that fall into any of these categories of coping skills, then please do so below. And again, my comments are a safe place. Feel free to get out all of your anxieties and to chat and to hold each other up there, because safe spaces right now are incredibly valuable. And with that, I am going back to reading the extremely gory, extremely disturbing thriller that I have thrown myself headfirst into to try and not think. I will speak to you guys later, and for the love of all that is holy, please wash your freaking hands. Bye. And honestly, the thing that I'm singing when I'm washing my hands is happy birthday to me, because it's still my freaking birthday month and you can't stop me. I got Scottish real quick. Okay,